8:10 WBCK, joined in the studio once again by Representative Jon Hoadley of Kalamazoo. Good morning.
Good morning.
Man, when we set this up, I thought, it might be okay to get a Democrat perspective on this whole Gamrat thing, because we've been hearing some things. And Courser, let's not forget there were two to tango here. And so I thought, well, by the time Friday gets here, this thing will probably have calmed down. No big deal. Forget it. So if you haven't heard this, former Representative Gamrat has decided to put her name on the ballot in Plainwell in Allegan County to try and get her seat back.
That's
after
right.
her colleagues have kicked her out. So we'll get to that in a second. First, what has been discussed in the media to some extent has been that, of course, the Democrats were not part of this process by a large extent. And so the Republicans had their hearing. Courser was probably on his way out and decided to head it off at the pass and just leave sooner. Gamrat did not. She was expelled. That's what we know. But some of the assertions that were being made by Democrats were they're trying to hurry this thing up. Maybe there's more fire where the smoke is and all of that. Is that true?
Well, so I think there's two things to look at here.
Yep.
The first is that this expulsion was done differently than many have been in the past. And I say this with no disrespect to Chairman McBroom or Speaker Cotter, because I've enjoyed working with both of them. But what ultimately in the past, these committees were typically 3 Republicans and 3 Democrats. This time it was 4 Republicans and 2 Democrats. Typically the process would play out over a series of months with calling multiple witnesses. In this case, the process played over 1 week of real testimony, 2 weeks of testimony, and we only heard from folks, from the House Business Office, from legal counsel, and from the members. We actually didn't hear from any witnesses who actually participated in the behavior. We had this committee set up in a way that was supposed to allow them to have subpoena power, but we never took a record roll call vote, thus they couldn't actually subpoena any witnesses. And when we tried to give them the subpoena power, they didn't take it, right? So you have these series of questions that you would then say, even if we're assuming best intentions, why couldn't we have just slowed down to get it right? Because this is one of the most serious powers that we have. So that's, I think, one aspect of it. And then we're kicking out a process that, folks like me who were not on the committee had less than 48 hours before the report was released to when we were supposed to vote on it. And I don't know about you, but I had a lot of my conservative friends who for months would say about the Affordable Care Act. Remember, that was 2,000 pages. No one had time to read it.
Yep.
Well, folks like me had less than 2 days to read 833 pages, let alone listen to 5 hours of testimony.
Mm-hmm.
So, I would say what's good for the goose is good for the gander. And in this case, a little bit more time, the ability to deliberate over the weekend, to do our homework would have been helpful. And a lot of time, that's what my colleagues were doing on the floor Thursday night into Friday morning.
While this was all going on.
Absolutely. And the second piece was, Democrats from the beginning had said, can we get a third-party, impartial criminal investigatory agency to come in and take a look at this? The Attorney General, State Police, someone who actually has experience, not only the House Business Office, who serves at the pleasure of the Speaker, but someone who's got an arm's length transaction here that can say, hey, here's exactly what we think in terms of criminal misconduct. And, what was good is that once Democrats and Republicans started talking on the floor late Thursday night, we couldn't solve the process problem that got us there in the first place, but we did resolve that concern. And so I'm glad that the Attorney General's taking a look now, state troopers are taking a look, and we're going to have that third-party investigation.
Representative Jon Hoadley of Kalamazoo is here. We're talking about the Courser Gamrat flap, and we'll come back in just a moment with more on WBCK.
Have you heard?
8:16 WBCK, Friday, Richard Piet Show, and Representative Jon Hoadley is here from Kalamazoo. So you wanted the third party to look at this. Now it is, but we're done with it now, right?
Well, we are done with it. There was a decision to expel. Once the resolution was amended to include the third-party investigation, then we felt there was sufficient evidence of significant wrongdoing, and ultimately we moved forward with the expulsion. What's interesting is that Article 4, Section 16 of the Constitution of Michigan, 1963, says that our body, with the concurrence of 2/3 of the members, is the sole judge of the qualifications. That's why the whole process piece does matter, because ultimately 2/3 of us determine if someone should stay or go.
Mm-hmm.
And in this case, it just, no expulsion, we've only had 4 in the state of Michigan, has ever been the same. And so this one was really looking at both the evidence of wrongdoing, but then the significant cover-up that occurred after the fact that so diminished public trust in the institution and as well as for her constituents that ultimately that's what warranted expulsion in this case.
But how much of that can be taken into account here? Because what we've been led to believe, the real rub is whether or not the law was broken.
So again, the breaking the law itself is not the determination of whether someone can or can't be expelled under our state constitution. And really, this is why I think also folks needed some time, because it's a personal bar, right? It literally says they shall be the sole judge of the qualifications of its members. And so that's a personal choice. I know a lot of my colleagues on the Democratic side who voted no did not condone the behavior, but they were saying, their bar was higher and they thought it had to have criminal charges or, actual criminal conduct. And so that was why some of them who, thought the behavior was reprehensible still voted no, while other folks did not.
I got it. So this is going to sound like Inside Edition or something. I don't want to make it sound like we're gossiping, but was there an indication of the behavior that was going on that we now have learned, just among folks in the House?
I think folks knew that that former Representatives Gamrat and Courser had a close relationship, but that's also just because ideologically they worked on a lot of things together. And so I think for a lot of us, we assume best intentions with folks. The fact that they worked together, I can understand they were oftentimes at disagreements with leadership on their interpretations of the legislature or legislation. So, you hang around with your friends. We knew that they were sharing an office. That typically is not done that way, but again, there wasn't anything inherently wrong with doing that. So, you have to give people the benefit of the doubt. And I think when we live in a country that says you should be, in this case, innocent until proven guilty, if that's what folks wanted to do to try to shake some things up, that's great. When it crossed the line of then misusing state taxpayer dollars, when it was, the cover-up and the deceit, that's where I think a lot of people ultimately said, enough is enough.
Representative Jon Hoadley's here from Kalamazoo. When we come back in a minute, before you were a lawmaker, you understood and helped craft political campaigns, and you have a perspective on the Gamrat campaign to get her seat back, and we'll talk about that. And a fair amount of Republicans like to, and we've heard it, say, oh, hey, let's compare this to the Senator Smith unloading a gun into a car thing, and why aren't we talking about that? We'll talk about that, too, coming up in just a minute on WBCK 823 WBCK, Friday. Richard here. John's here, too. Representative Jon Hoadley, Democrat of Kalamazoo. So yesterday, the story broke that former Representative Gamrat's going to try to get her seat back after all of this. And I was reading some of the Facebook response to that. A lot of people going, oh, brother, she doesn't get it, et cetera, et cetera. What, from your perspective as a political campaign expert at one time, what are her chances here?
So I think this is a race to watch. Currently, there are 5 folks that have filed on the Republican side in the primary. And, former Representative Gamrat is a tough campaigner, and she's going to go out there and she's going to talk about her issues. And I'm one that believes in forgiveness. I imagine a lot of voters may as well. And when you think about, you need 10, in a 5-way primary, 20% could be the win. And are there 10, 20, 30% of the electorate in the Republican primary who thinks she got an unfair shake in all of this? Maybe they send her back. So I think it's definitely a race to watch.
Okay, so there was sufficient, and the Republicans decided this, as you pointed out, or with a couple of Democrats on the committee, but that she did enough to be kicked out. You're saying that there are a fair amount of people who think this was wrong the way this was handled, or it may not be true.
Absolutely. There's a ton of folks who've expressed that they think she was unfairly expelled from the legislature. They couple that typically with distrust for the establishment or leadership, and particularly in the Republican leadership. And so if those voters turn out to vote for her, she could return. And what's interesting is that the same section of the Constitution that allows members to expel a body of a member of the legislature also says you can't be expelled for the same offense twice. So if she was expelled and she then gets returned to that position by her voters, well, then she has every right to serve. Now, what's interesting, though, is that there's also a Democrat running. David Gamrat will be filing for that seat today. And so, if she were to be the nominee, then I think you have an opportunity. It's going to be a hot election in the 80th district, and that's typically not a district that you see a lot of Democrats doing well in. But if it's Representative Gamrat and, former Judge David Gamrat running, hey, that could be something to watch, too.
Wow, very interesting. So some of the chatter as a reaction to all of this brings in the apples to bowling balls comparison, maybe, of Senator Virgil Smith, who's in trouble because he shot at his ex-wife's car. And I think they stripped him of his committee assignments in the Senate and so on. Is that a fair comparison, the expulsion of two for this and firing a gun that could have ended up a lot worse than it did?
I mean, I'll say that fair is fair, and I will not be one that tells the Senate how they should conduct their business. But if they were to begin an investigatory process, I don't see how you could deny them the possibility of doing that. I mean, what the allegations are serious, and so the process. If there was an investigatory process, I, for one, would want to see those results. And I think voters do, too. Like I said at the beginning, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. And it doesn't matter if you have an R or D after your name. What's fair is fair.
So does the Senate, as far as you know, go by the same standards for expulsion as the House?
They do. And so they can set the bar to which they feel that bar should be set. And, that's up to the Senate to decide. Again, each chamber shall be the sole judge of its own members. And so it's really up to them to figure out what's the process. The last expulsion before this occurred in the Senate. And, that, again, was they had Senator Jay had many, many charges pending, all those sort of things. There was also significant abuse of rules and potential HR violations. So, if that's the standard that they continue to set, I guess they'll have to have the committee to decide if that warrants expulsion.
All right, quickly before you go, as far as Jon Hoadley can see in evaluating what's going on in the House, are we going to get a road deal soon or what?
I know that they're working on a framework right now. It seems like it's getting closer to something that most people agree with. If we're not, we have to get close to $1 billion in new revenue and then add the cuts on top of that if we want to have something that's going to work for the long term. We're not there yet. But, I hear there's conversation. Is it maybe $800 million or $900 million in new revenue? And, here's the deal. If you want your roads fixed and you're tired of writing checks to your repair shop, you got to tell your legislator how much you'd be willing to pay to actually get your roads fixed. That gives us something to work off of, though. So, call our offices and let us know.
Fair enough. We will talk next Friday with our representative locally, and that's David Maturin, and also next Monday, a week from this Monday, with Dr. John Bison. So we continue with these legislative updates. We appreciate your perspective as well, John.
Well, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Representative Jon Hoadley, WBCK 820.